Antigua. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Guterres. First of all, you've been visiting the areas devastated by these hurricanes. What is your assessment?
Well, it is horrible to see a paradise island like Barbuda transformed into hell. 95% of the houses completely destroyed, total devastation, and the people had to be completely evacuated. And this is something that we are seeing more and more. There is an increased intensity of hurricanes, an increased frequency, and an increased devastation. And the origin is clear. We are facing the consequences of climate change.
We're hearing the most appalling stories of people who are homeless, they're without clean water, hospitals are without electricity. Do you think the response to these hurricanes just wasn't good enough?
Well, there is an enormous effort, first of all, by the Caribbean states themselves and the Caribbean emergency mechanism that is working. The UN is doing its best to support here in the islands. But we launched an appeal, and the appeal is not sufficiently funded. So I strongly ask the international community to increase humanitarian aid to the Caribbean states, and especially to be able to support these states for reconstruction and to build resilience in relation to the future. There will be a very important donor conference in the context of the World Bank and the IMF annual meeting. I appeal for very strong solidarity with the people of the Caribbean. These people have not contributed to climate change, but they are in the first line of victimization by climate change. They need the support of all the international community.
You said you hadn't seen the donations flowing into these countries. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that the world is so focused on so many crises and so many situations that naturally these things tend to be forgotten. But this level of destruction, this level of devastation is such that I believe we have all, because we are all contributing to climate change around the world, we have all the moral obligation to express solidarity to these that are the first victims of this dramatic increase that we are seeing of the consequences of climate change.
You talk about climate change, and as we speak, another hurricane is on its way through this area. What do you make of that? Will we be seeing more and more of these hurricanes?
Unfortunately, it is true. I mean, the scientific proof is there. More CO2 in the atmosphere means warmer oceans. And as oceans are warmer, there is more evaporation, there is more vapor in the atmosphere. And of course, that means much heavier rainstorms. So when an hurricane now moves over the ocean, its intensity is increased dramatically. And when it reaches land, it has a devastating impact that we have seen. Instead of dissipating over the oceans, the intensity is indeed enormously enhanced. And it is clear, warmer climate means more hurricanes and more devastating hurricanes, and we need to do everything to stop this. So we need to make sure that the Paris Agreement on climate change is implemented, and more, as the Paris Agreement is not enough, that enhanced commitments are made by all countries around the world in order to make sure that we are able to dominate this very dramatic evolution.
Mr. Guterres, if we could move on to North Korea, because President Trump has tweeted about his frustrations over North Korea's nuclear program. Despite sanctions, the regime is pressing ahead with its program. How concerned are you about its current and future program?
Well, I believe that it is very important, above all, to preserve the unity of the Security Council, to keep all the countries together. I think the sanctions were a very important step, and that unity on one hand puts an enormous pressure on North Korea that is necessary to keep, but on the other hand I believe it opens the possibility and the opportunity for diplomatic engagement. And I am a believer that there is no military solution for this crisis. A military solution would be devastating. I am a believer that the opportunity created by the unity of the Security Council Council must be put in place and that we must have an effective diplomatic engagement.
On Iran, Donald Trump is expected next week to withdraw his support from the nuclear deal. Do you think that will harm the future security of that deal?
Well, it depends, of course, on what the Congress will decide, and there are other important partners to the deal that corresponds to a resolution of the Security Council. I am a strong believer that the deal was an important step forward for our collective security, and I hope that the deal will be able to stand.
Can we move on to the Rohingyas? The UN has repeatedly asked Myanmar for access to Rakhine State. Will you be able to access this area where there have been alleged human rights abuses?
Well, I hope that that will be possible. We have insisted on the need to stop military operations, on the need to have unrestricted humanitarian access to the areas impacted by the violence, and also to affirm the right of return of the people that fled in huge numbers, more than 500,000, to Bangladesh, a return that needs to be voluntary in safety and dignity and to their areas of origin. And I strongly hope that these, together with the recommendations of the group that was led by Kofi Annan, trying to find a solution for this dramatic problem, I hope that what I've asked for and that these recommendations will be implemented by the government of Myanmar.
We have heard the most horrendous stories of the Rohingyas in neighbouring Bangladesh of rape and murder. Will the UN be pushing to hold those people accountable for these abuses responsible?
As you know, the Human Rights Council has appointed a commission of inquiry. The commission of inquiry will be travelling soon to Bangladesh. They asked to be allowed to visit Myanmar. Until now that authorization was not given, but I strongly urge the government of Myanmar to allow the commission of inquiry to be able to enter and to witness what has happened. And obviously that is a basic condition for accountability then to be a reality.
Can we move on to the UN itself? Because President Donald Trump has said he wants to see the organisation reformed, and I believe you've expressed support for that. What can we see in the future when it comes to the UN and reforms?
Well, since the beginning of my presence in the UN, I have said that we needed a number of very important reforms to make the UN more effective, more cost-effective, more nimble, more quick in answering and responding to the different situations of emergency we face in the world, more able to have a preventive and capacity, a mediation capacity facing the enormous conflicts we have. We launched a number of very important processes in relation to the peace and security architecture, the management aspects of the reform, the UN development system, making it more able to respond to the needs of member states on implementing the Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. So all these aspects are now presented to the member states, to the General Assembly, to the different bodies of the UN, and I hope that countries will come together and will be able to support these reforms that I think are essential for the UN also to regain full confidence of the peoples of this world. We are here to serve the people, and it's necessary that the people looks at the UN as an instrument to support them. And for that we cannot be bureaucratic, we cannot be slow, we need to be effective, and we need also to respect taxpayers around the world that support our activity, making sure that their money is well spent.
What concrete steps will you be taking, though, and when can we see those steps in action?
Well, we have started. We have already, for instance, created a counter-terrorism office to respond to one of the most pressing problems of coordination we had. We launched a roadmap for gender parity, and now I'm already in my appointments guaranteeing full gender parity in the new heads of the different departments of the UN that I appoint, and we will move to full gender parity in 2028. We have launched a very strong set of measures against sexual exploitation and abuse, both in civilian setups and in peacekeepers. We have now a victims advocate at global level and 4 in the most difficult areas that we have around the world, where these situations were more dramatic. And we are presenting a number of very important changes in relation to our budgetary system, to our staff rules, in relation to the architecture of our peace and security mechanisms, increasing the capacity of prevention and mediation. And at the same time, we want to have more coordination, more transparency, more accountability in the way the different agencies work together, especially at country level, to make sure that the UN in each of the countries, especially in the developing world, is much more effective in delivering to the people that needs our support and our assistance.
Just finally, you've been in the role for just a few months now. How are you finding being the UN Secretary General?
I don't think you can find a more difficult job, but I don't think you can find something in which you are so enthusiastic about what you do, and especially about what you can do, hoping that the international community will be able to support us to do the right thing and to really create the conditions for peace to prevail, create the conditions for sustainable and inclusive development, and create conditions for the human rights agenda to be revigorated.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, thank you very much for being with the BBC.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.